So just to be clear what I mean by this, when we talk about a quadratic equation, we usually write it in the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. You guys are pretty good now at factoring quadratics when a is 1. So a quadratic like x squared plus 2x plus 1, something like that. These are simpler because you're just looking for factors of this number that add up to be this number. When we get an a in here, it gets a little more complicated, and I want to show you why. So the way I'm going to show you why is to show you a factored form. So if I have something like 2x plus 1 and x minus 2. Let's expand this. So let's FOIL this. We're going to do 2x times x. That's 2x squared. 2x times negative 2 is minus 4x. 1 times x is plus x. And 1 times negative 2 is minus 2. So this would be 2x squared minus 3x minus 2. So here's a nice quadratic. Now let's try to go backwards. We already know the factors because I just told you them. 2x plus 1 and x minus 2. But getting there is a little bit trickier. It's a little trickier than it was when we just had something like this. The reason it's trickier is because this middle term is now no longer just factors of this. Right? It's factors of this and this. Okay? I think that the easiest way to solve these most of the time is just guess and check. And that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. But there are some tricks that I'll show you next week. Okay, that make, like, I would really only use them for the harder ones because they take a long time. They're like multiple step things that you do to try to figure out the factors. But when we have an a that only has two factors, like 2, the only things that make 2 are 2 and 1. It's actually not that hard to factor these. The reason being, we know that the factors are going to be 2x something and x something. That's the only way to get 2x squared. So now we have to think of two somethings that are going to make this negative 2 and this minus 3. And actually, if it's negative 2 here, there's only really 2 ways to make that. 1 and negative 2, or negative 1 and 2. And so you just have to think kind of in your head and figure out, well, how am I going to get negative 3 out of those two numbers? And I would kind of think about this and I would go, wait a second, I know that negative 4 plus 1 is going to give me that negative 3. So I'm going to put my minus 2 here to get that negative 4, because 2x times negative 2 is negative 4x. I'm going to put my plus 1 here to get that plus 1x. And then I would check it, but we already checked it. So what we're doing is we're factoring this, but we're combining this and we're combining this. So instead of just the like 1 and negative 2, it's now the 1, the negative 2, and the 2. Okay? You guys see how that all works out together? So, yeah, it is a little confusing. Yeah, so let's do some examples. Yeah. Okay. Let's do another one this way. I think it's, well, maybe not. Maybe it's actually more confusing. So what if you had something like, actually, let's not use 2. Let's use 3x squared. And so this is the whole thing we're talking about. When a is greater than 1. Right? So what if we have 3x squared plus 4x? So we're looking for two terms that are going to give us this kind of this quadratic. And again, this kind of hint that I gave you is going to work pretty well here. Since we only have one possible way to make 3x squared, just kind of guessing and figuring this out is going to be the best trick. So what is the only way to make 3x squared? Yeah, 3x times x. Right?
Maybe like the square.
I mean, there are other ways, right? Like 3/2 x times 2x, but it's never gonna work out like that. You'll never have a problem like that.
Could you do square root of 3 in front of the x's?
Right, but you'll never see anything like that. Okay? So you're right. There's other ways to make 3, but we're not going to worry about the other ways. We're only going to worry about whole numbers. Well, integers. But really whole numbers. So now how are we going to figure out the other two? Well, in this case, there's only one way to make 1, right? 1 and 1. So 3x plus 1, 3x plus 1. We do have to consider, could it be minus 1 and minus 1? But if this term is positive, then there's no negatives involved. So then we check it. Does this work? 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 1 is 3x. 1 times x is x. And 1 times 1 is 1. So we got 3x squared plus 4x plus 1. Questions about that? What we're doing? It's really basically the same thing for now that you've been doing. It's just that now we have something in front of the x squared, and that changes the math of it a little bit. Right? But they're not going to be too hard for today. Questions? Yeah. So I want to do a bunch of practice, but I'm going to stop the video because